when you're coming up with like your character,
Yeah.
like that's what I'm so fascinated by, because there's so much of an overlap in like my interest versus like what I imagine would be like the influences that you had. Like
Mhm.
what were some of the influences that you took when you were kind of brainstorming ideas?
So I think you would agree that like interests grow over time, and it starts with like this one seed.
Yeah.
Whether it is an event that you go personally through that draws you to a certain interest, and then over time you start learning about that one thing, and that one thing has branches to other things, and they kind of have a relatability to the core ideas of the things that you like. For me, it came from a childhood experience, growing up in a family that had very, how do I word this, very deeply religious ties, pressing cult like devotion on one side of my family,
Hmm.
um, where my father was from. And my father was not like that, but he was from a family like that. And don't get me wrong, they were lovely people.
Yeah.
The religion itself was very bleak, very end of the world type. Everyone's a sinner. The world's
Hmm.
coming to an end. That kind of stuff. Very devoted followers, and because of the strong ties to religion and me not understanding religion and always questioning religion, I got a huge interest in religion. And once
Hmm.
you start reading about one thing and you start understanding these principles and these thoughts and ideas behind it, you start also getting an interest in the counteracting parts of that. So
Hmm.
I went from like religion to the occult, and
Yeah.
then in between everything there, and then like the music that I was into tied a lot into that as well. And um, I guess in a way, you rebel against the system that like you grow up in because you don't agree with it, but it's not something that you consciously do. It's just because you have this urge to kind of break free from this mold in which you're growing up that has so many set boundaries, and then you
Hmm.
realize that outside of those boundaries is where life really is.
Yeah.
And you search for it more and more. And the more I read, the more knowledge I wanted to know, the more I knew, the more restless I became. I remember like being 11, 12 years old and laying awake at 3 in the morning because I'm trying to figure out the universe. You know what I mean? Because I have all these questions and like, well, how does this work? How does that work? And like,
Yeah.
there's so many planets, and like, it just goes into like deeper and deeper things. And I think for me, what would be deemed back then as like, forbidden knowledge,
Hmm.
because this is all before the eras of like internet, and
Yeah.
I'm 40 years old, so we didn't
Yeah.
have internet until I was like 15. So it was a lot of books, a lot of reading, a lot of comics, and a lot of topics that were covered in school, influence by friends and stuff like that. That really kind of drove a narrative. And then, like, I remember very vividly, my brother had a friend named Bart, and Bart was the alternative kid in school. He was this like long-haired, kind of goofy dude with Iron Maiden patches on his jacket, and
Hmm.
my dad was a big music fan in form of Bob Dylan and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
Phil's Crosby, Nash, a little bit of like Roy Orbison, more guitar oriented music. So I already kind of liked the more like guitar style music growing up. And then my brother's friend gave my brother a mixtape, which was Killers, and I listened to that tape like religiously, and I loved
Yeah.
it so much. And from that, like I started listening to Metallica and the Misfits, and then the first three albums that I ever bought were like Biohazard's New World Disorder, Immortal, Damned in Black, and Fear Factor Demanufactured, which was like all these like very various different styles of music. But
Yeah.
now when you look back at me, my character, me as a person, you can kind of see like, okay, that was the base influence because I love hardcore music, grew up in it. I'm a big black
Hmm.
metal fan, and just obviously a
Yeah.
little bit more industrial stuff. EDM style music, and it influenced me so much, especially when you look at black metal and the ties that it has. All these things, even when explaining it, like for me, it seems so logical that all these like little hooks were like tied into this one thing, because in its own way, it has all these connections to things that I like as a person, and that really shaped my perspective on life, but also my perspective as these wrestling characters.
Yeah. That's so interesting. That's very similar to kind of to where I kind of got my like love of knowledge was just questioning things around me, like questioning, the religion I grew up in, which I grew up, in Texas. So very like Southern,
Mhm.
well, I grew up in non-denominational church, which was fucking terrifying. Um, like, doing like things to try to scare you away from like not celebrating Halloween. And like as a
Oh, yeah,
kid,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and then,
yeah,
and there was like all this like satanic panic kind of thing,
yeah,
growing
yeah.
up. And I just didn't understand it. It's like, well,
Why is it
Halloween,
that? Like, yeah.
yeah, what's bad about Halloween? I'm just trying to get some goddamn candy, I'm not hurting anybody. And then you just start
Yeah.
questioning, like, well, are these people telling me are they telling me the truth? Like, and then I just would branch off to all these different religions and different philosophies. And I
Well,
also had like a thing where I would read a book about, about someone, and everybody that they would mention, I'd be like, oh, I want to learn more about that person. So like I remember reading Marilyn Manson's book when I was a little kid,
yeah,
and he talks about like Anton LaVey. And I was like, well,
yeah,
who the hell is Anton LaVey?
yeah,
It just started reading about him. I was like, oh, this guy is not like evil. Like, I mean, like his philosophy is actually very interesting. And
yeah. Believe in yourself. How
yeah,
evil, but worship you and like do everything you can
yeah,
to help others and not be a bad person. And yeah,
yeah,
and it's the same. It's the same for me. But you brought up an interesting point. You said, why are these people scaring me? Well, because they're scared themselves, because this is what they've
mm,
been grown up, and you get the system where control overtakes control, overtakes control, overtakes control,
mhm,
and it all kind of like steps back down to the next generation, and it's just, it's a form of fear mongering. And I like, don't get me wrong, I have no qualms with like religion or religious
yeah,
people. One of my absolute favorite people in the world is my nutritionist. His name is
mhm,
AJ Sims, devoted Christian, but like as loving as you can be, as welcoming, as accepting as anybody. Never holds any judgment on anybody.
mhm,
Um, Super good dude, great husband, fantastic trainer, and he would fall on the denominator of someone who was like deeply religious.
yeah,
I think, especially in this day of like misinformation and social media, where we have deemed that like traditional media is the spreader of fake news, but now all of a sudden
mhm,
TikTok and Google and Instagram all of a sudden relay information that will feel hidden and will feel like, oh no, this is what is really going on. And it's a really strange thing when you think about it, how people can be raised to believe one thing and then they are susceptible for all these other things as well, because the systematic approach of religion plus how social media will indoctrinate you with things is pretty much the exact same thing, only the difference is that there's visuals attached to this, and you see people talk and speak in a pseudo intellectual way for you to pick it up and think, well, this person sounds like legitimate, even when you do it subconsciously. Right?
yeah,
There's this whole study as to why people are so prone to conspiracies nowadays, and apparently it comes from the idea that this hidden knowledge that you possess makes you smarter than other people. So it
yeah,
feeds the ego, and in the
yeah,
last, I want to say 5-6 years, it's gotten so bad with all the
yes,
misinformation and all the things that are out there to like really scare people. And I love conspiracy theories,
oh yeah,
and obviously you
same,
do too. But
oh yeah,
I think that I still possess the bone to put things in a critical sense, because I'm a
mhm,
non-believer first before I'm convinced, right?
yes,
When
yes,
you're younger, you're more susceptible to things, and you read something, see something, and you accept it as truth, and then later on, as you kind of progress and you get older and wiser, you start seeing different angles of the same ball of information, and all of a sudden you realize that it's not what they were saying, or the perspective is different, and things get quote unquote debunked a lot easier. So you become a little bit more cynical, but in a
mhm,
positive sense of like, you got to convince me of this. This is a great theory, but it's just that it's a theory. So I always
yeah,
start off with being a non-believer until I have like tangible evidence and proof. I'm definitely not someone who just like reads something and goes, "Yep, that's it. Here we go.
yeah.
That's how it's going to be."
I've always thought it was so interesting how so many people were that is that is what they do. They immediately, as soon as they read something, if it even sounds remotely true, yeah, well, there's my belief. Then I believe in this. Like, I look at conspiracy theories kind of the same way I look at like urban legends or
Yeah,
mythology.
yeah,
Like,
100%.
they're fascinating, but I don't believe any of it's real. I mean, maybe there are some conspiracy theories that are real. I mean, there are some that I think are more real than others,
100%.
but I just think it's kind of a fun read. It's not something that I'm
Absolutely.
like that I dive into like, oh my god, I found out the truth. And me
Because
and me and my little group, we know the truth, and
we
everybody
figured it
else are
out.
sheep.
No one knows, but we figured it out. And, you know, I think also with that, a lot of information has come to the light. A lot of
Mhm.
things have come to fruition where things that in the 70s and 80s we would like, debunk as conspiracy stuff now comes out. And yeah, no, these programs actually existed. And that I think
Yeah,
is also contributing to people like, well, if this turned out to be true, then this must be true as well. And like, it's difficult and it's hard, and I don't blame people for being as absorbent as they are, because I think that a large portion of the world is just now getting exposed for the last 5 to 6 years to like a lot of these conspiracy things, and to them it sounds like thunder striking.
yeah,
It's revealing, and it's almost like a science fiction movie coming to life. And some of that stuff is
yeah,
really like crazy to think about. The remote viewing programs and
yeah,
Ultra and stuff like that. And
yeah. Was it
um,
the Philadelphia experiment? I don't know
oh
if you
yeah,
ever
oh
looked
god,
into that. Like, that's a
yeah,
good one.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. There's
Um,
well, that was like Al. Oh, who was it? I think Jimmy Page was trying to learn how to do that on David Bowie. Have you
yeah,
ever heard that story? That So Jimmy Page,
I know he was a devout occultist, and he bought Crowley's house.
yeah,
I know
Bolskine. He
that.
bought the
Yeah,
Bolskine mansion
yeah,
on Loch
yeah.
Ness. So whenever he bought that house, obviously Jimmy Page is just massively influenced by the occult,
Mm,
especially Aleister Crowley. Like, and at one point, David Bowie was also very interested in it as well. And him and Jimmy Page developed a bond over that.
yeah.
Well, David Bowie started getting paranoid that Jimmy Page was learning how to, like, basically astral project and then enter
Mhm.
David Bowie's brain and
Mm,
control his thoughts.
that's fantastic.
And so David Bowie just completely lost his mind,
Yeah.
and he believed that Jimmy Page was forcing him to see hallucinations of
Mm,
like his swimming pool turning black, like the
mm.
water turning black. So David Bowie hired a witch to come and perform an exorcism on his swimming pool. That's it. Just,
But then,
yeah.
in the exact same vein, right? When you look at like modern day research in regards to frequencies and dimensions,
Mhm.
it comes more and more forward that there is like so many more vibrations than we realize. I just read up this whole thing about using ultrasounds or sound frequency to destroy cancer cells, right? So
Yeah.
there's definitely things that, in terms of like sound volumes and waves and frequencies, that we're just now starting to tap in. So when we speak of like astral projection, or that, like,
Mhm.
I think in the next 100 years we're going to look at, and that's a big duh, of course,
Mhm.
with all the advances that we're making. But I think in the next 100 years we're going to look at the reality of things in such a different light, in such a different way. And now that we kind of realize that what we are experiencing right now might not be exactly what we're experiencing, and like how time flows, and
Yeah.
how human life is perceived by us through our brains.
That is interesting. Yeah, I do think about that often. I try not to in some ways, because
It drives you
sometimes
crazy. It can get
yeah,
scary.
I know I try not to think about the future, which probably explains a lot that I'm very much like in the past. The future terrifies me. Like, thinking about, what we'll know and what I don't know. I'm very terrified of the future. I just like the past. I like being stuck in the past and like learning those things, which I don't know, is obviously not a bad thing to an extent, but
I think a lot of people
yeah.
do. I think we're moving so fast. Like, you see up all these like 90s nostalgia things, all these videos pop up, and the way that
Oh yeah.
some of those AI videos have like, hey, welcome to 1995. Do you
Oh
remember?
my
And then
God.
you go
Yeah.
down to them, and my wife can't watch it. My wife's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to see it. It's like everything was so much better back then. And then you don't
Yes.
want to be the old man yelling at clouds and like, oh, everything was so much better back then. But then I think about
Mm,
it like, no, I actually think that back then, like a lot of things were a lot better. And maybe they were, maybe it was good that we weren't as exposed to one another as we are nowadays, because everything is
hmm.
an instant connection and an instant conversation and an instant a feed of criticism or,
Yeah.
everybody's got to have an opinion on something continuously, you know?
Yeah. Well, and back then there wasn't this anonymity, like a wall of anonymity that you had. Whereas, and today, if I didn't like you, I could send you a mass amount of messages telling you how much I hate you.
Yeah, yeah,
But,
totally.
in the 90s, I would have to come up to you and say it to your face, which no one would do. But now, so like you can be exposed to so much more criticism
Yeah,
than
yeah.
you ever were. And, you know, that anonymity doesn't it doesn't soften the blow to you.
No, it
Like
doesn't.
when I read criticism, I mean, some of it's very funny. Like for me, like whenever I read it, so I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty good. Some of it really gets me though. I'm like, oh my God, like
Yeah,
how did
it
they
can be.
know about
It,
that insecurity?
it
Like,
can be. It can be so actively hurtful, and I think that's also a big part of it. Like, I have never met any person that was successful that would have time to go and do stuff like that. And of course,
yeah,
everything that you can say about like hateful comments on the internet has been said. But I
yeah,
think sometimes the perspective and the psychology behind it, like insecure people want you to feel insecure. Hateful people want you to
mhm,
feel hated. Um, People that are comfortable in their own success or in their own lives would not be about that. And it's
mm,
almost sad to see that there is such a massive array of people that sit on phones, Twitter, social media, whatever it is, days on end, and all they do is find the next thing that they can argue about or have a
mm,
counteractive opinion for the sake of having a counteractive opinion. Half the time are not educated on the things that they're saying, but they're saying it because they can.
mhm.
And that is the part where I feel like, do people not realize how trapped they are within the system of you're distracted, you are continuously distracted, you have so little time because relatively speaking, we don't have a lot of time on this earth. And like, what is your legacy really something of I spend years and years on my phone? And I think for a lot of people, it is because it's a continuous escape from what you have not accomplished in your life.
Yeah,
And it's a giant mirror. But I mean, again, that doesn't soften the blow. But I sometimes do think about the psychological effect of individuals that run their lives in that form. And obviously, in my industry, criticism is it's ever present. You're
yeah,
never going to be everybody's cup of tea. But it's always very very difficult to see people speak of success, right? And
mhm,
how unsuccessful you are, or how untalented you are, or all these things that are being thrown your way, where you're like, it's crazy that what I do mentally affects you so much that this is how you feel, despite the fact that you maybe see 10 minutes a week of me on TV or
yeah,
see a social media post. Because I'm not really a very active person on social media. I try to be a lot more
mhm,
active nowadays.
yeah,
Um, and actually, to be honest, like I have two people that run my social media for me. I still have access to obviously both my
mm,
ex and my Instagram account. My Instagram account is a little bit more managed by me, but for the most part, I have people for it because to me, it has become a place of detraction. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's not the route that I, as a human being, choose, because
mhm,
my route is, here. And I know that's an ironic statement coming from someone who's having a podcast interview right now.
yeah,
This is also tying in the world that we live in, because I still enjoy stuff like this very much.
yeah,
But
yeah,
there is definitely something to be said about the psychology behind people that have such strong opinions about something that they're not educated on. And if you
mhm,
point that out, it gets even worse, because
yeah,
everybody wants to be validated and feel special within their area. And I think that's often where it comes from, the fact that you do something that is unique and they miss something in their own life, and this is the only way that they can control that part of themselves that is not content with their own lives, that a lot of people are just sitting there waiting for your downfall so they can point fingers and laugh and say, ha, you see, I was good not making my life decisions. I was right not to pursue things because X, Y, and Z. It's a strange dichotomy in my very strange.
Yeah, I yeah, completely agree. Do you think that a lot of that confidence, like of not necessarily being above something, but not getting trapped into that insecure mindset that tends to feed off of those things, that a lot of that confidence that you have comes from like your passion for the occult or and like heavy metal? I think me being like a heavy metal fan growing up definitely made me feel more secure in myself because I
Yeah,
was a weird little kid, and then I found out there were other weird little kids, and
yeah,
we all had something in
100%.
common, so we maybe weren't that weird. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think weird is also such a it's such a term in that sense where what is weird, because what is the status quo? I don't think the status quo
yeah,
exists anymore, right?
yeah,
Me and my wife had this conversation not too long ago. For instance, right, when you look at quote unquote nerd culture, back
hmm,
in the day, like the things that kids got bullied for, from Dungeons and Dragons to like Warhammer to video games to
hmm,
anime and stuff like that. The cool kids now like that.
yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah,
become like the cool thing to do, which is such a flip flop from what it was. Like Comic Cons are massive, so massive that people that don't really have any associative ties to it will jump on it and will
hmm,
claim their position in those spaces.
yeah,
Where back in the day, if you would say that you were into cosplay or you were into comic books, you'd get bullied for it. Nowadays,
hmm,
everybody I know, from tough MMA fighters to the regular individual living across my street, regular,
yeah,
um, likes Marvel movies and has seen Captain America and stuff like that,
yeah.
and wears Marvel shirts. It's strange how that whole thing shifted, right?
Hmm. It is very interesting. Like, Marvel movies are the biggest movies on the planet, which
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't happen without it becoming massively popular. And
Yeah,
I may not necessarily be a big fan of it, but I do like the idea that it is popular, that people are like, "Yeah, oh yeah, no, I actually will gladly talk about my fandom of a thing that used to be considered like nerd culture." And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It really got absorbed in the zeitgeist of like today's society, and obviously, I would say that that peak is probably around like the 2015 to 2018,
yeah,
19 era, where like those movies had like a really big cultural impact. Where I think
mhm.
nowadays it's kind of simmered down a bit. You could almost say that it's like it's completely accepted as
Oh
to
yeah.
as to what it is. But it's interesting to see how those things have made such a shift
Mhm.
into what is now considered to be cool and and awesome, and it's both good and bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it is yeah, time just kind of has a way of doing that, of making things more like accepted, or just at least taking out some of the fear, because like heavy metal, obviously, like nowadays there's no parents groups talking about how afraid they are that their kid is listening to Slipknot or whatever.
Yeah,
But yeah, it wasn't that long ago that Ozzy Osbourne's on trial, Judas Priest is on trial because they think that they're making their kids
yeah,
kill
worship the
themselves. It's
devil
like,
and kill themselves and stuff like that. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and but it just took a couple, like one generation removed, basically, to now where nobody cares if you listen to metal. Like, there's not too extreme of a person. There's nobody protesting metal bands or artists from performing in their city. And part of me kind of misses that, in a sense of like, I like the danger of it.
yeah.
Like, I think I
It's
was partly attracted to that.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Like
yeah.
it was the thing. It was the odd one out. I mean, it would make you the odd one out, and I think in a way where growing up and you felt that you weren't accepted for, and you were pushed in that quote unquote weird kid corner.
Mhm.
That eventually, when you accepted it, you wanted to be the odd one out because you were proud to be the odd one out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was. Like for me, which I've talked about, quite a bit. But as a kid, I was just obsessed with Marilyn Manson,
Hmm.
absolutely obsessed.
Right.
And it was just, but part of it was that I wasn't supposed to be. That had a big
Yeah.
part to do with it. But also that, I mean, that guy was weird as hell, but,
Mm.
made people who were weird feel like, oh, you're not as weird as I am. And
Mm.
look how popular I am. So
Yeah.
you'll be all right. And there was like this weird sense of feeling like, oh yeah, I might be all right then. Like maybe,
Yeah.
this is just a bump in the road, going to school with these kids who don't like me or whatever. Like, maybe I'll get to a point where that isn't the case. And, and I think that people that didn't grow up being fans of like metal, they don't really, I still think most of them don't understand that side of it. They
Yeah.
don't understand like that it has like a much stronger community than I would argue probably any other genre of music ever.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I think that's also the part, right? You want to find kindred spirits in terms for yourself, but like at the end of the day, we all want to belong, right?
yeah,
Um, no man can survive in no man's land forever,
yeah,
right? And even if whether your group is like small or it's large, we all need somebody or something to kind of like attach yourself to, which I think is very important for the human experience. Because I think that on a soul level, we always try to find, here comes that word frequency. We're trying to find the same frequency with people, and even if they sometimes might not be in the exact same bracket of music or
mhm,
things, sometimes you just meet people that are so different than you, but on a deeper level, you connect so well with them that it doesn't matter what they're into. You just gravitate towards them. For instance, that's something that I have with my wife. My wife and me are pretty polar opposite in like what the things that we
mhm,
like,
yeah,
but on a emotional and love level, like
mhm,
I haven't loved the person as much in my life as I love my wife, despite the
yeah,
fact there's so many differences between us, from her cultural background to the music that she grew up with, to me coming from Amsterdam and being
mhm,
this hardcore kid dude that was
yeah,
into like tattoos and metal and stuff like that. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So we all want to belong, and whether that is within a community as a metal community, or whether that is because you have a frequency connection with the person. We all want something that makes us feel comfortable with ourselves, and sometimes the validation, in my opinion, comes from finding that right individual or individuals or
mhm,
community that makes you feel more normalized for yourself.
yeah. Well, that pretty much explains, the like the continuing just prevalence of religion is a lot of that is because of that feeling that people feel that sense of community and that
Yeah.
sense of belonging by having a church or not just a
Mm.
church. I mean, a mosque, synagogue, whatever it is they
Yep.
go to. They
Yep.
have that feeling of like, oh, well, I'm in this group. We believe the
Mm.
same things. We think we're going to be going to the same place.
Yep.
Like it's that sense, which is why, like, you know, even though I don't necessarily believe any of it, I highly support people to find a religion if that's what they want. Because I do think it does a lot of good for a lot of people. I just don't like the issue for me is just whenever if you're trying to like affect somebody else's life with that religion. Like
100%.
otherwise, I think it's great to have that community. I
Yeah.
think it's a powerful thing. It's, beautiful in a lot of ways. But I
Yeah.
think that's people just want that feeling. They want that
Yeah.
feeling of belonging. And
Absolutely.
sports teams have the same thing, it's
Absolutely.
all
Yeah.
it's like a tribal mentality that we've had for ever since humans have existed.
100%. We flock together one way or the other because of common denominators. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, like even which I know you're fascinated by this topic too, but like the Sumerians, ancient Sumerians, oldest civilization,
Yep.
I mean, they were highly religious, like
Yeah.
insanely, religious. Basically, laid the foundations for what I would say is pretty much all religion.
Yeah. A lot
And
of what modern day religion has, you can find back in like the Epic of Gilgamesh and stuff like that, the
yeah,
floods and the worshiping of like God and stuff like that, and their savior. And I mean, they were credited for a whole bunch of things. They had like one of the first like educational system where like
hmm
young boys would become scribes and stuff like that. And
yeah,
uh,
tablet schools.
yeah,
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 it's called tablet schools, I believe. Yeah,
yeah. Did you know that they love beer?
Oh yeah, yeah, because it was safer to drink.
Yeah, hundreds of different variances on beer.
Yeah,
And
that which
I'm
is
not a drinker. I don't drink at all. But I always thought that was
same.
a fun
Yeah,
thing to kind of like. I thought it was like one of those fun things where like, oh yeah, they love beer. I'm like, oh, they had hundreds of beers. Like, cool. Like,
it is amazing. Like, every once in a while they'll do like an archaeological dig, not just for like Sumerian civilization, but all these like ancient civilizations, and they pretty much all come to the same conclusion that like Jesus Christ, these people love beer. Like whether it's Egyptians, Mesopotamians, Babylonians, Assyrians, it's like
yeah,
God, they just were brewing beer nonstop.
yeah, like,
Which I mean, it makes sense if drinking water is going to kill you. It's like, well, geez, we need something else, and
I think there's
beer
also
works.
like a religious aspect to it because of the fermented alcohol and stuff like that. That makes you obviously feel a certain way. It made them feel
Yeah.
closer to what I'm assuming is closer to the gods in terms of celebration and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's interesting too that they performed exorcisms. They had
Mm.
like all kinds of things that
Yep.
we think of as being like Catholic based, like
Yeah.
in more described in Catholicism, with like demons and exorcisms. But you go back and look, and like the Sumerians had high priests who would
Mm.
perform exorcisms, and they had like dozens of these like super demons basically. And I've always thought that
Zuzu.
was like so interesting that even from the beginning we have this idea of like demonic forces
Yeah.
and things like that. It's like,
Like
yeah,
Pazuzu, the wind demon. It's like obviously one of the big ones, and that's funny
mhm,
to find that like back, the Exorcist and stuff like that. That
yeah,
the demon. There's a lot of like cultural relays from the Sumerians. Even coming back now, you'll find parts of it in Christianity. You'll find parts of it everywhere because it's such a it's one of the first ever world religions that was made back then.
yeah. I mean, it is the first, I believe. I mean, the Sumerians, yeah. They're also, I mean, which has nothing to do with religion or anything, but it's the reason why we use like 60 seconds in a day and like 60, I mean, it's not in a 60 seconds in a minute and 24 hours in a day is because of the way they counted with their fingers.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, which is
Invented
fascinating.
apparently invented the wheel too.
Yeah, invented the wheel. Yeah, yeah, which is I mean, my God, it's like they're like the Beatles of civilizations. Like
The
because they got to
Beatles of
get to it
civilization, the
first, they
Sumerians.
got to do all the best things. Like so yeah, because yeah, they would count with like the three segments of the finger and
Mhm.
like use the thumb. And so
Yep.
you would end up with 12. So everything was like base 12.
Mm.
And so like that's why 24 hours in a day, 360 degrees in a circle, like all those things come from them, which is it's a hell of an
They
impact.
invented so much that like we base societies nowadays on writing, like you said, math,
Mhm.
medical systems. Uh, they had a financial system, not in coin, but more with like I want to say with beer and
Mhm.
nutrients and stuff like that, where they would pay people in not in like monetary value because there was no such thing as coins yet, but
Yeah.
first type of like payments and stuff like that.
Mhm.
You do one thing for one thing, you get this in return.
Right. It's like a bartering system.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's yeah. Like that's one of my favorite things about history is kind of reading about a group or reading about a, like an ancient city and just imagining myself like kind of like Charles Dickens Ghosts of Christmas Past being taken to that place and just seeing it for just for a day. Like let me just see what this place looked like and like what did it smell like, what just all these like random things. Like do you like if you could go back to any place in time
That would
and just
probably,
see it, is that where you'd go?
I would probably go there. Yeah, because it'd
Yeah.
be like there's always two parts of history that have always deeply interested me. Like one obviously is the Sumerians, and the other one is World War II. Mainly because my
Hmm.
family was so tied in with World War II. Obviously, I come from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Both
Yeah.
my fathers were veterans. Um, and yeah, so those two eras, if I could have a peek, and not for like, especially when you talk about World War II, not for funsies or something like
Yeah.
that, but just, I feel like
Yeah.
there's a lot of that on both ends that is so important to remember and to understand. And
Hmm.
throughout the course of time, a lot of things get lost and forgotten and taken for granted. And but yeah, seeing something as the the birth of like how structural society was formed. Yeah, it would be incredible to see stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same. I think like ancient Egypt, I know like as a kid, I would read all these books from or writings of like Aleister Crowley and him talking about going to Egypt and kind of coming up with like the thelema,
Yep.
like that whole philosophy. And it just always sounded so fascinating to me, like to just explore these
It
like
is. It
temples.
is. It is a like again like all that information that is supposed to be hidden is supposed to be hidden. I
Yeah.
think that is what makes life interesting for someone like me. Like the stuff that you're not supposed to know, but it also makes having that knowledge what I do to be a lot more realistic. I'm gonna take you on a ride for a second.
Okay.
I'm moving to a different position because I see that my phone is reaching its battery end. So
Yeah. No,
we're
no worries.
in my gym, so we're just
Oh yeah.
walking around to the next station. So.
Okay.
And as you can see, obviously in the background, I have a lot of like wall murals. I love
Yeah.
Hinduism and gods of the Hindu gods, and even they have a lot of ties in with a lot of things that you can find back nowadays.
Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah, which Hinduism is a fascinating one too. Like I remember
Fascinating.
I
Yep.
think like either junior high or high school reading the Bhagavad Gita and like kind of diving into that a little bit. I was like, God, this is fascinating. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I mean, Greek and Norse mythology have always been the top of my list as far as fascinations when it comes to mythology, religion, and yeah, I find because humans always have those questions like where do we come from, where are we going,
Yeah.
and how do we handle life while we're here. And it's just so interesting to see how different groups of people at different times answered those questions for
But there
themselves.
is always certain correlations. There's always a structure. There's always a
Hmm.
belief system, and that belief system is either like one single deity or several deities. It's
Yeah.
so interesting to see how throughout the ages you can kind of tie a red line through everything, and
Yeah.
tie it back to the exact same origins, which I mean obviously is very telling as to how society came to be and like even what we do nowadays.
Yeah.
Um, it's one of those things that like I used a lot in again in the character in my characters in wrestling, because for me having that level of authenticity is just the thing that I find most important. And even if it's not everybody's cup of tea, because like you can't always be everyone's cup of tea, and no matter what
Yeah.
it is you do, for me, the wrestler, the professional, the entertainer, if you will, having that level of like consistency and authenticity has always been like really, really important. And that's something that definitely grew over time with reading and digesting material, like the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a thing that I think a lot of people may not understand about like whether it's occult readings or just learning different religions is the philosophy that you kind of are able to give yourself, where you're able
Yeah.
to take bits and pieces from things. And like the occult,
Yep.
like occult readings, like whether it's Anton LaVey, Aleister Crowley, whatever, just those philosophies of like lifting yourself up and like giving yourself as much power as possible without taking it away from other people. Like I think it's just such a very misunderstood philosophy that
Yeah,
yeah.
let's say, and that's the right word. They become philosophies, but they're also like a really interesting look inside the human mind and the psychology of individuals. And sure, with the good comes the bad, because
Mhm.
not everything was positive, not everything was great, because there's like
Yeah.
also documentation of like depravity in regards to like Aleister Crowley and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's important that we also know these things. We have to know these things because they speak of the mindset, the validity of certain things,
Mhm.
what to do, what not to do, how does this individual think, how did they come up with it, and like backtracking and decoding
Mhm.
how the individual got their mind to where it was for them to write the things down that they did and like have the actual actions that they had, I think is a
Yeah.
very important thing.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of where my brain goes with it as well, is like, well, where are they getting these ideas from? Like, where did Anton LaVey like, did that just come out of nowhere? That can't be. And same with like Crowley, just going through, and then yeah, you kind of pick apart the philosophy from the philosopher, because I mean, obviously Crowley's pretty flawed human,
Yeah.
but the philosophy isn't necessarily as flawed. And until you like some of the rituals, like ritualistic things, I mean, I take it or leave it. For me, I like the philosophy, the mindset, like those types of things. I think
Yeah,
those are the
I
more
mean,
interesting.
if you read a lot of the tenets, they don't speak about insane things,
Yeah.
right? Bother no one. Um, but if people continuously disrespect them,
Mhm.
there should be repercussions, right? There
Yeah.
should be something to counteract that.
Mhm.
Treat everybody well. Don't harm children. Don't
Yeah.
harm people. But do whatever you can without hurting, like you said in the beginning of our conversation, without hurting anybody else. Um, get as become as good of a person you can be um,
Mhm.
without harming other people. I don't
Yeah.
really see anything wrong with that, but I think a lot of it is misunderstanding. But also, like when you look at LaVey Satanism, um, obviously there's a lot of like deliberate uh, usage of the word Satanism, because
Yeah.
obviously we know Satanism from one thing, which is another really interesting thing, because obviously in Latin Satan means opposer or
Yeah.
adversary. It doesn't mean dude with red skin and hooves and a pitchfork. That's not what it means.
Yeah.
But even throughout that, like when you look at, for instance, you look at like Paradise Lost, right? John
Hmm.
Milton's Paradise Lost, which is in a sense the perspective of the devil's perspective of
Hmm.
of the Bible and all that stuff. In a sense, that became a lot of that became canon, but has never been absorbed in the actual Bible. But
Yeah.
people base a lot of their opinions on what they think is the devil and stuff like that off that, which is essentially a fictional poem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then over
Exactly.
the years, it starts merging into like pop culture and stuff like that. And I
Mhm.
wouldn't even say pop culture, but maybe the zeitgeist of those eras. And now it weaves
Yeah.
into like into media, into like movies and all
Mhm.
that stuff. And that's kind of how a lot of people also absorb their knowledge, because now it's like one and one is two versus it was actually not one and one is two. It was just one. There was no one and one, and now we have absorbed this in a way that we have another level of like fear mongering that we can use. Well, the reality of things, they look very different when it comes to the devil and the Bible and stuff like that.
Yeah. You know that the Paradise Lost is why when we think of the Garden of Eden, like the fruit, why we think of it as an apple, even though it never mentions an
So
apple.
there you go. Yeah, because in the Bible it never specifies what
No,
fruit it is. Yeah.
it just says fruit. But so in Paradise Lost, Milton kind of or as he was writing Paradise Lost, Milton realized that the Latin word for evil or sin, is malum, or malum, so malum, and but that's also the Latin word for apple.
So it's a
So,
mistranslation due to the
well,
context.
it's a him. He found out that that they're the same word, so he's basically just a play on words. It's like a pun that he added in. It's like, oh well, that's crazy. It's the same word, so I'll just make it an apple. And then ever since then, in any depiction of like the Garden of Eden,
Yeah.
fall of man, whatever, it's always been an apple.
So now take what you just said and apply that to hundreds of years of that kind of like thinking and
Yeah.
translation and add-ons and detractions, and that's how a lot of misinformation happened, because you
Mhm.
can arguably say that the basis of a lot of things that we base certain religion systems on are based on fear and mistranslations versus
Mhm.
the reality of what was written,
I
which is a
think
crazy thing to think about.
for sure. I think that's what started getting me very skeptical about religion in general, was just thinking about, well, how are they? So you mean you're translating from
Mm.
Aramaic to Hebrew to Latin to
Right.
English and then English again, because it's basically two different forms of English,
Right.
and nothing got changed? Like that's where in my head I started thinking, well, that seems a
Do you know
little.
that when the King James version came out, that even people back then thought that the wording was outdated, and the way that
Really?
they even the people back then felt that it was a very outdated way of writing. You know, using words as the, it came across as like very poetic. And
Yeah.
back then people were already like, well, this sounds like ancient. This doesn't sound like relevant to this day and age, which is crazy to think about, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that's the case for a lot in the Bible, and I think that's it's always like a touchy subject to talk about, but I feel it should be talked about. And like
Yeah.
actually, the content creator that I really enjoy following is Dan McClellan. I don't know if you've ever
Hmm.
heard of him.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Like I love watching his videos, and obviously he approaches it very much from the perspective of study and scripture study, religious studies. So there's a lot in there that when you read it, and even before seeing Dan's content, I already knew a lot of stuff was like misinformation, but then having someone like him kind of like validating that, but also telling the audience as to what else, and it's a lot, is not what it seems.
Yeah.
Which is also difficult because you're trying to change a system that is literally thousands of years old in that regard. Um, and it's so ingrained in millions of people around the world.
Hmm.
It's a difficult task at hand, but I think it's even more difficult to like for people that have been raised with certain sets of ideas. It's really difficult to embrace that too,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Because,
people don't want that.
well, yeah, unless you have just an inherent level of skepticism,
Mm.
you're probably not going to question any of it, which,
No, you're going to fight it because you feel. I think you feel insulted in your own intelligence, and that's why you rebel against it because you have said things, done things, shaped your life from this perspective that you've always had, and now you're told that that perspective is actually not accurate. So of course you're going to fight it because it hits you on a level that is so deeply personal that you don't want that to be the truth because that means that a lot of things that you have done and said are actually not based on the right things that you thought were right.
yeah, completely. And yeah, and I don't necessarily think that everybody should just drop what they think or anything like that. But there's nothing wrong with
Debate
questioning.
is necessary for growth.
Yes, yeah. That's how I've learned more probably than anything is
Yeah,
debating a topic and realizing that I don't know as much about it as I thought I did,
100%.
and then going,
100%.
oh well, I should probably look into this a little bit more before I do this
Probably
again.
shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, yeah. That was, I grew up with a grandfather who was a lawyer who
Mm,
we would argue constantly and debate constantly. And it,
yeah,
I think, is single handedly like what made me, so much.
question a lot of things, but also gain knowledge on a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I'm eternally grateful for that because
Yeah.
otherwise I wouldn't give a damn about learning anything other than what I had to. And
An inquisitive mind is good, always. You got
yes.
inquisitive because if you're not, then like life will only be to a certain threshold. And I think personally, the object of life from a day to day basis is knowledge, is learning, is becoming better. I think that's all we do. Even you and I now having this conversation, we're learning a bunch of stuff. Every day is a moment for anybody to pick up something new. And it doesn't always have to necessarily be, anything big, just like small things, because you're always processing information. And I think the obtaining of information is what makes life so interesting. There's a joy to knowledge.
Yes. And it's endless.
100%.
Like you'll never even, I mean, as much as I like to think I know about history, I
Mm.
probably realistically know maybe 1/10 of a percent
Yep.
of,
Yeah.
like I know in theory, I know nothing about it. I just, but I love that it is that way that I'll never know it, all of it,
Yeah.
even close.
You just strive to learn as much as possible. And like,
Yeah.
there's so many principles. And the same kind of goes for wrestling. There's
Hmm.
so many little things to wrestling that people don't realize. And every day I step in the ring and I'm training, even when I'm teaching class, as I'm going, all of a sudden I realized that, you know what, instead of like moving my hand this way, it actually works better if I do it that way. Or,
Yeah.
you know, and then we cover different styles from all over the world, and they have their own quirks and their own techniques, and there's like an array of technical applications that is just endless. It is
Yeah.
so difficult to master professional wrestling in its entirety. And then, like, you know, talking about like something as like ring psychology, which I consider to be the black belt of professional wrestling, if there is such a thing.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so difficult to really nail down the concept of like predetermining as to how a crowd is going to respond to you doing X, Y, and Z. And then if they don't, then you have to flip the script and try something else. You know, it's there's an art to professional wrestling. Absolutely.
Without a doubt. It is. Yeah. Every time that I watch, which I've been a fan of wrestling since I was a little kid, probably always will be. It is just the evolution of it is so fascinating. Just in my lifetime, which I'm not very old. I mean, I'm only 30, but just since I was a kid, it has evolved to such a skill level, which it always was obviously very skilled. Like you had to be very skillful to be a professional wrestler.
Yep.
But I mean, the evolution to where it is now, I'm just like, this is incredible. Like how, but it comes from taking things from here and there and learning from the mistakes of, oh, well, this didn't work then, probably won't work now. So let's, twist things around. Like it's all just an evolution.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, even football from the '70s is not what football is now. You know,
Yeah.
even perhaps like, and I'm not a football a person that knows a lot about football, but I would imagine that all these games are played differently. The rules change.
Oh yeah.
The approach of the training changes, so the game changes, the athletes change, and the same goes with us. Like, but also like a big impact or a big factor on what changes wrestling is the crowds that watch it. Right nowadays, they can flip one channel and they'll see UFC, and especially around the 2009 to 2013, 14 era, that was very pivotal because a lot of people would, divulge into like MMA a lot more than they would pro wrestling because MMA was the next best thing,
Yeah.
And I feel like
right.
now we kind of like leveled out in a way where wrestling is super popular again, thank God.
Yeah.
And it has been for the last, like, I want to say 5, 6, 7 years of it being like massively popular again, and it's only going up. But like I said, people could flip a channel and they'll see how an actual armbar looks like or how an actual punch to the face looks like. So we have to adjust what we do, but at the same time, we cannot lose the essence of professional wrestling. We can't lose that because that's the spirit that makes us work. If we start working as quote unquote MMA fighters, then what are we doing? Because we're not MMA fighters. Pro wrestling to live as its own entity while still maintaining hints of realism that translate enough for people to understand what we're doing because they have seen it being executed for real.
Exactly. And I exactly. And that's, I think, what draws me to wrestling over MMA, which I've never been a massive fan of like the UFC or MMA. I mean, I do like it and I have an insane amount of respect for the people who do it.
Yep.
But I like the drama, the the storylines. Like I love the whole scope of professional wrestling, not just what's happening in the ring. I like every part of it, which obviously what's happening in the ring is insanely important, but that's something that, mixed martial arts will never have. And it's just the way it is. Like, I mean, there's some of it, there's some drama and there's, some behind the scenes
conferences and stuff like that, post-fight interviews, pre-fight interviews.
Yeah.
That,
but it's nowhere near the same what professional wrestling has. And I think that's what always has drawn me to that road versus like other, avenues.
I think for us, it's really important that the wrestling is the outcome, the storylines are the setup. And if the story is not told in enough detail or with enough due diligence, then the match can still be good. But if the story fits the match, then the match will be great. And that's the difference where wrestling can be a great match, but the difference between memorable and great matches is the story building up to the match and then the match hitting all the buttons of the story, and that makes something a lot more memorable because it kind of goes hand in hand. And here's the thing: there's also just such a thing as sometimes just like you just go out there and have a killer match, depending on like what it is that the company wants from you. Sometimes it's just like, hey, you guys go out there, just go wrestle, go kill it. You have so and so much go nuts.
Oh, there have been plenty of those matches where I've seen, even like on like a WrestleMania or or a huge event, where I don't really know a whole lot about like the bag, like how did we get to this point? But at the end of the night, I was like, that match was probably one of the best matches of the night. Like there wasn't as much of a build up as there was for some of the other events, but God, that match was insane.
Yeah.
And I think
that's how it lives, and that's the beauty about wrestling. There's so many ways to translate, so many ways to execute. It's never a straight path. I can tell you that. Even if we have a 4-week plan or a 5-week plan, whatever happens in week 3 might change our perspective in regards to how the crowd responds to certain things. That what we had planned for week 4 needs to be adjusted, or needs to be delayed, or needs to be altered. It's a very very difficult world to be in, but it's, for me also, obviously it's my life's blood. I think I was put on earth to be a professional wrestler in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, it comes across, you can tell when somebody is, and it's not just with wrestling, it's with really anything, when something is a passion versus a career.
Yeah.
Like there's a very big difference in those two things. And with you and with, there's a handful or quite a few wrestlers, but there's like, clearly this is the passion. This isn't just like, oh, well, I'm doing this because I can do it. Like this is my passion in life, is to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of wrestling is seeing people who are so passionate about it actually getting to do it, and seeing the fans in turn sharing that same passion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for everybody, obviously, for every performer out there, the approach to wrestling is always theirs. Mine has always been a little bit more theatric, because I enjoyed that part of it. And funny enough, I actually read an interview with Danny Phil from Cradle Filth when I was younger, and he mentioned that he used to go to shows like Alice Cooper and Iron Maiden. They would have these, Iron Maiden would have Eddie on stage, and big puppets and stuff like that. And he loved the theatrical aspect of it. And he said, like, I found out that, like, once I became a band myself, there wasn't like a lot of people that were doing, big theatrical approaches or costumes or anything like that. And as time progressed, I just felt myself be drawn more and more to that. And I wanted that to be part of my craft. And that always resonated with me. And that's kind of where even back in 2012, at the time I was in wrestling for almost 8 years. Around that time, no, 10 years, sorry. And around 2010, 2011 marker, I started wearing the black on black suits because I thought that was a cool aesthetic. I felt that, like, for myself, I wanted to do something that I had an explanation for every single time. And for me, it was the aesthetic of this occult hitman style individual, a guy with a lot of tattoos that would wear something as like formal, super formal, as like a suit would be like an interesting aesthetic. And it would tie in with, all the stuff. And as time progressed, coming into NXT, and beforehand, I used to make all my own vignettes, and I would add the tarot cards to my vignettes, and I would add all these like little nods to occult things that I liked, and then tying in like hardcore and black metal and stuff like that. The costumes started meaning more and more. The vignettes started meaning more and more. I was able to like translate parts of my character and lay hidden Easter eggs within the realms and confines of these little vignettes, and in the suits that I wear, the masks that I eventually started wearing. All of them tell their own story, and to me, that really made me love my craft even more, because the wrestling obviously is the thing that you love. You get into wrestling because of the wrestling, right? But eventually, for my creative outlet, I had to do more than the wrestling. And obviously, my style is a very different, unique style, because I blend martial arts with pro wrestling. And that it kind of bounced back and forth, where I would work on the aesthetics and the meaning and the hidden meaning behind stuff. And then once I had the aesthetic, it became more about the wrestling. And then once I had the wrestling in love, I had to go back to, okay, what else can I change? I can play with lighting. Okay, why red lighting? Well, because red blood changes things. So every time I would have like something of red, something would happen. How do I view the world? Well, I'm a pretty cynical guy nowadays, and I see on the internet how human nature is kind of developing in this like hateful manner. Okay, so now it becomes about people already being corrupted. So now I'm going to corrupt people more because now my prerogative becomes kind of like a reflection of like how society is. A lot of my stuff for the past, I want to say like almost 8, 9, maybe 10 years, and maybe if I'm really honest, a little longer even, has become a little bit of like social commentary with how
Yeah.
I see, human nature develop within these confines of like social media and how they treat each other. And then like, the real spirit of human nature comes forward and how destructive we actually are.
Yeah.
So this thing would become more about like, no, I want you to be this hateful because that's who you really are. I will make you better. I will corrupt you, but it's not really corrupting because it's just really who you really are. And,
Yeah.
especially starting with when I had the platform, that was something that we were supposed to do back in 2020 when right before my first release. I um, I had this whole Dark Father thing set up, which was going to lean a lot more into that. And obviously, I got released. We actually filmed some vignettes with my wife because she was going to join that thing too. And then obviously I got released. And then once I went over to the other company, and I had the chance to do that, and I was like the first person I wanted to do that was Cody. So I explained him the idea, and he was like, "No, that's fucking great. Let's do that. Let's
Yeah.
let's get to the point where you make me do things, or it's no longer about putting my shoulders on the mat. It's about me making you do all these things. And at the end of it, obviously, as any story is the good guy eventually beats the bad guy. But then the last thing became about, well, I made you do this, I made you do that, I made you do all these things. So yeah, did you really think this was about putting my
Yeah.
shoulders on the mat? And then it would affect him for a longer time. So, it defeated the purpose of like just winning in terms of like pro wrestling winning, right? I wanted
Mhm.
something to be a broader spectrum, and within those realms I would put the costumes, and then like now tying that in back into WB for the last 5 6 years where that lives even more, where this thing has become much more about being everyone's enemy. I'm in no man's land, and I hold no allegiances, but all I seem to be doing is just like giving the audience what they want, despite the fact that they would boo me for the same things that, for instance, Damien threw me through a table, which they loved,
Mhm.
but then when I hit him with the chair, you booed me. Isn't it the same thing? Don't you just want violence? You love it when it happens to one person, but then not the other person, and that makes you
Yeah.
pissed. So, stuff like that, and I always just remember um, there's a particular match that I had with Adam Copeland,
Mhm.
and the way we set it up was kind of trying to lure Adam to our side. And that's the thing that I've kind of felt that I was always trying to, with the whole corrupting thing. And there's a match where he had with Buddy Matthews. This is about a year and a half ago,
Mhm.
and the lights cut, and the lights go back on, and Adam has a chair in his hand, or Buddy pushes him so much that he grabs a chair, and the lights cut, and the lights go back on. I'm standing next to Adam, and I'm telling him, "Do it, do it." And Buddy gets on his knees and puts his hands behind his back and just smiling because all we wanted to do is to prove that we can corrupt people. And obviously, played out different that night because that was the whole spiel of it. But kind of the whole how people treat each other, and they want to see that level of violence, and then giving them the option to do so. And what would you do if you could? Would you do it?
Yeah.
And those kind of like things just became a leading factor for me in a lot of stuff. Like I said, like I was able to tie in like a lot of my colors, my gear colors. Well, why black and gold, and why black and black, and why black and white, and all these things would speak to the character, would speak to how he would feel about things. Why certain masks? Well, because certain masks meant this and this, and they have a relevancy to the character because he's wrestling this guy. And it's just stuff that I felt would help me translate a lot. Like I said, it might not be everybody's cup of tea, but for me, it worked very, very well. And
Yeah.
to this day, I enjoy doing that thoroughly.
Yeah.
Um, I told you at the beginning of the conversation before we press record that I'm working on a coffee table book where I'm going to have
Mhm.
everything kind of like etched out and like written out, and something for fans to really kind of like digest in what all these costumes mean and what all the mask meant, the stuff that I was wearing with in Australia against Damien Priest, and why did I come up with that mask, and what did it mean, and stuff like that to me lives beyond what wrestling is on its own. It's something that
Yeah.
you can go 50 years down the line and go, hey, why did he do that thing? Why these? Oh wait, did he mean so and so and so? I wanted something that
Right.
lives beyond me. If that makes sense.
Yeah. That's going to be amazing. That is, yeah. I cannot wait for that. Dude, so before I know we're running out of time, I got one more thing for you, which is, as a, someone who is a, massive metal fan, I have to ask, like, what is your Mount Rushmore for metal band?
God, dude, that is such a difficult question.
Very difficult. So saved it for the but there's no wrong answer. So yeah, I mean,
okay. So, but here's the thing: it is an ever-changing landscape for me.
okay.
Terror.
Okay.
Watain. Guns Up. Oh boy, man, you're really putting me on the spot here.
Yeah, a little bit.
Fear Factory, because they influenced, especially Demanufacture was like a really big influence on me as a kid.
Yeah.
Behemoth.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, Behemoth is amazing.
Yeah. And this is difficult, right?
Yeah.
There's so many bands that, because it's also in no order. If you would have asked me this question like an hour later, it might have even been different. But I think I would also have to, just given the relevancy of how it influenced me. I just mentioned, Danny Filth. With, I was left like the music videos that they make, and they inspired me to make my little vignettes too and stuff like that. That interview that you talked about it, but I would say Gorilla Filth. But like I said, like if you were to ask me that question an hour later, it might be completely different, because I can, there's a hardcore top five or a hardcore Mount Rushmore. There's a metal Mount Rushmore. There's a black metal Mount Rushmore. There is I like underground hip hop too. There's so many Mount Rushmore. So it's so difficult for me to pick 5 bands and say these 5 bands.
Yeah.
But if I talk about relevancy to me, and tying it into the pro wrestler, I think those 5 bands have influenced me on a multitude of levels, or have been like my life's blood, nurturing me. And something that is not metal at all, but one of my absolute favorite musicians is Dallas Green from City and Color and Alexis on Fire, and he's a super cool guy.
Yeah.
Sweetheart of a man, very intelligent. But his music is so important to me because it's been my road music for the last 12, 13 years, right? And again, like I said, not metal, other than obviously Alexis on Fire, which I guess we could tie more towards hardcore and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there is so many bands and musicians that I listen to. I think I have and I think, like I said, there's a thrash metal Mount Rushmore. What I mean? There's just so much. That's a very difficult question, but I would stick with those 5 as of the cultural relevance to this conversation and to my perceived path in the world of professional wrestling.
Well, you answered it perfectly, I would say. So
thank you very much, man.
Well, man, this has been an absolute blast. I've had a great time getting to talk with you.
Thank you, dude. I'm so happy you wanted to do it. Absolutely. I'm so happy that you wanted to. You, like I said, you do great stuff, and I will thoroughly enjoy my cardio on my mornings a lot more with your facts and videos. So thank you on my behalf for keeping me entertained that way. You're doing a great job, man.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that, man. Well, if you have any last messages you want to give out to the people, whatever you want to.
Yeah, man. Just, it's a difficult world nowadays, and everybody's going to tell you that you're wrong, and not a lot of people are going to tell you that you're right. Don't listen to what people might think. Listen to what it is that you want to do, because what you want to do eventually becomes, legacy. Don't be afraid to fall on your ass. We have to be okay and comfortable with falling on your ass. I don't know who said it, but it was somebody a couple of weeks ago who said it, like, embarrassment is a good thing. because it teaches you humility, and it would be good for people to overcome certain things. And it's an important life lesson to fail. Failure is an absolute necessity in order for you to become better. I have failed more in my life than I have succeeded. And I think any person with any shared success will understand that failure is the biggest success to success. Um, let no one convince you that people that mock you for the things that you do or the things that you fail at are successful at what they do, because they're not. Because no person that has failed or succeeded in life will ever not encourage you to get back up on your feet. And it's important for people to get back up on their feet and keep trying, because the human spirit is unbreakable if you want it to be. So I'll leave everybody with that. And obviously, check out my socials. Um, you can find me on Instagram, on X, and even on TikTok nowadays with some silly Muay Thai videos and some wrestling breakdown stuff. Not super active on neither of them, but
Yeah.
I always try to, find some time and look at certain things. I'm very grateful to all the people checking in. I'm very grateful for my fans. I'm very grateful for you for having me. So thank you very much, man.